I've always hated being home alone. There's something unsettling about the silence, the way it stretches around you, amplifying every little creak and groan of the house. But when my parents went away for the weekend, I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The first night was fine. I spent it watching movies, eating too much junk food, and texting my friends. But as the hours passed, the house started to feel bigger, emptier. It wasn't until I went to bed that I began to feel the unease creeping in. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakable, coming from downstairs. My heart skipped. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but then the footsteps came again. And this time they were closer. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound was clear, the creak of the floorboards downstairs unmistakable. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I was alone. My parents weren't due back until Sunday evening. Maybe it was an animal? The house had always had its odd quirks. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became someone was downstairs. My mind raced with thoughts of burglars or worse. I reached for my phone, but I froze. If I called the police, they'd think I was overreacting. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept down the stairs as quietly as I could, holding my breath with every step. I reached the bottom of the staircase, peering into the living room. It was empty. The front door was locked, the windows shut tight. But something was off. The kitchen light was on. It hadn't been before. I hadn't turned it on. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I stood there for a moment, the silence pressing in around me. Then, from the kitchen, I heard a noise of faint scraping, like something dragging across the floor. My pulse quickened. I wasn't imagining this. Someone or something was in my house. I stepped forward, my bat tight in my grip, moving slowly toward the kitchen. But as I reached the doorway, the noise stopped. I stood frozen, listening for any sign of movement, but the house was eerily still. Then I heard a voice. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It came from the kitchen. You can't hide forever. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. Someone was here. But who? And why were they whispering like that? My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. I couldn't stay in the open. I needed a plan, a way to get out of the house. I turned to run back upstairs, but as I did, I caught sight of something through the hallway mirror. A figure, tall and thin, standing in the doorway of the living room, just watching me. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't make out any features. My breath hitched, and before I could react, the figure stepped back into the shadow of the hallway. Gone. Panic surged through me. I ran to the back door, but it was locked. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were shut too. I was trapped. I stumbled back into the living room, my mind spinning. What should I do? Call the police? Run outside and try to get help? But there was nothing. The house felt too big, too empty. Every room felt like a potential hiding spot for whoever was in here with me. Then, from the corner of the room, I heard it again. A whisper, faint but clear. Why did you run? I spun around, bat raised, heart pounding. But the room was empty. No figure, no movement, just the soft hum of the refrigerator. I stood there, frozen in place, unable to move. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The house was still, the silence heavy around me. My mind screamed for me to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It was like the house had become a maze, and every path led me back to the same place nowhere. I finally mustered the courage to run for the front door. I tore through the house, nearly tripping over my own feet. The front door was locked, but this time I had the key. My hand trembled as I fumbled with the lock, finally throwing the door open. The cool night air hit me like a wave, and I stepped outside, panting. I didn't look back. I ran to the neighbor's house, knocking frantically. They let me in, and I stayed there, terrified and shaken, unable to sleep. When my parents finally came home, they found the house untouched. No signs of break-ins, no broken windows, no mess. Everything was exactly as they had left it. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear that soft whisper. Why did you run? Echoing in my mind. And I wonder if whatever was in that house is still there, waiting for me to come back. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. I had the house to myself for the weekend while my parents went away for a wedding. It was my first time being completely alone in the house, and at first I was excited. No one to bother me, no rules, just peace and quiet. But as the hours passed, I began to feel off. The house is old, built in the 1930s with creaky floors and windows that rattle in the wind. My parents always used to joke about how alive the house felt, but I never thought much of it. I'd grown used to the odd creaks and groans that came with an old house, especially at night. But something about being alone made those noises different, more intense. The first night wasn't too bad. I spent the evening binge watching TV shows and snacking on junk food. But by the time I went to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I chalked it up to just being nervous, but then as I lay there in the dark, I heard something. A knock, soft, almost inaudible, coming from the living room. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was past midnight, and there was no one supposed to be here. I told myself it was the wind, maybe the old house settling, but the knock came again. This time louder, more insistent. I sat up in bed, my eyes scanning the darkness. My phone was charging on the nightstand, and I reached for it, fingers trembling. I was about to call my parents to ask if they'd forgotten something, or to just hear a familiar voice, but I stopped myself. It wasn't like I could just call them every time I heard a noise. This was my chance to prove that I could handle being alone. I took a deep breath and slowly got out of bed, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The house felt colder now, the air heavy with silence. I stepped out of my room and into the hallway, my bare feet silently padding against the wooden floor. The knock came again, this time louder, as if someone or something was at the front door. I tiptoed toward the stairs, my heart racing. The living room was dark, just a faint glow coming from the kitchen. As I neared the front door, the knocking stopped. I froze at the base of the stairs, listening. There was nothing. No more knocking, no footsteps, just silence. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was nothing. But as I turned to walk back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow. It was fleeting, but I saw it clearly in the dim light, a figure, tall and thin, standing just outside the front door. I gasped and stumbled back, my pulse skyrocketing. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence, the coldness of its stare. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to go anywhere near that door. But I couldn't stay frozen in place forever. I backed away, my mind racing. Was I just seeing things? My eyes were playing tricks on me, right? But then I heard a soft voice. It was barely audible, but I could make out the words. Let me in. No. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure no one was outside. I hadn't seen anyone come to the door when I glanced out earlier, and my phone showed no missed calls. Yet the voice, it sounded like it was coming from right outside the door. I backed up slowly, my legs shaking. I needed to do something. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy book off the shelf, and crept back to the door, holding it in front of me like some kind of weapon. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, and then yanked the door open. No one was there. just the empty porch, lit by a single, flickering light. The cold air rushed in, and I could see my breath in the night air. But the doorframe was empty. There was no one around. Relieved but still shaken, I closed the door quickly, locking it behind me. But as I turned back to the living room, something caught my eye. A faint imprint, like the shape of a hand, pressed into the condensation on the glass of the door. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. It was like someone had been standing right there, watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, the lights on, listening for any more sounds. The house felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. When my parents came home the next day, they found me exhausted and on edge. I told them what happened, but they just laughed it off, said I was probably hearing things. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And ever since that night, the house has felt different. The knocking hasn't stopped. It's softer now, less frequent. But every time I'm alone, I hear it. I always check the door, but I've never found anyone. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something is out there, waiting for me to open that door again. And sometimes, when the house is perfectly still, I hear that voice again, a whisper just below the threshold of hearing. Let me in. I was thrilled to finally have the house to myself. My parents were away, and I could stay up late, watch horror movies, and eat all the junk food I wanted. But around midnight, I started feeling on edge. It was too quiet. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, and shadows seemed to stretch farther than usual. I shook it off, grabbed some popcorn, and settled in to watch a movie. Halfway through, though, I heard something odd, a soft shuffling sound coming from the hallway. I paused the movie, holding my breath, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was nothing and tried to get back to the movie. But then I heard it again, louder this time, like footsteps. I froze, heart racing. The house was locked. I had checked all the doors and windows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in the house. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed down the hallway. The lights were off, but I could see a faint glow coming from under the door to my parents' bedroom, which I knew I'd turned off earlier. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The room was empty, but as I was about to close the door, I noticed something chilling. The bed covers were slightly pulled back, like someone had just gotten up. I backed out, heart pounding, and went to lock myself in my room. But as I turned, I heard a soft whisper from behind me. "Are you alone?" I spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper echoed in my mind, making my skin crawl. I rushed to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, too terrified to close my eyes. When my parents came home the next day, they found the house exactly as they'd left it. But I know what I heard, what I saw. And now, every time I'm alone, I can't help but wonder if something or someone is still there, waiting in the dark.